My brother called my wife arrogant because she said no to him. Then he said women like her needed a lesson. At first, my parents called it a misunderstanding. Then they called me jealous, unstable, a son who hated his own family. Even when the calls started, even when his friends followed her to work, even when he cornered her at a wedding, they ran to protect him before they looked at her. Years later, that same word, lesson, showed up in another woman's case file. By then, my brother was in prison, my father's real estate sign was coming down, and my mother was finally writing the truth she should have said years earlier. My brother said my wife needed a lesson, then stalked her all the way to a wedding hallway. My parents called me jealous and unstable for exposing him. Years later, his domestic violence case destroyed their perfect family image. A shocking family revenge story about betrayal, justice, and the truth that cost them everything. This family revenge story ends where their lies finally collapse. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Then stay with me because this all started in my parents' living room with a wall of family photos that told me exactly who mattered and who never did. I did not know the word lesson would follow my wife and me for years. The first time I heard it, my brother was standing in my parents' house, talking about Aveline like she was something he had the right to correct. The last time I saw that word, it was in a prosecutor's file beside another woman's hospital records. But before the court dates, the wedding video, and the real estate sign coming down, there was my parents' living room in Eau Claire. That room had been telling the truth long before anyone said it out loud. I parked beside Vance's SUV on a clean Sunday evening in early winter. His rear window had the Voss Ridge Realty decal across it, the kind my father handed out like church bulletins. Even his vehicle looked more like part of the family business than I ever had. Aveline looked at my hand still resting on the steering wheel. "You all right?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, just giving myself a second. She did not push. That was one of the things I loved about her. She knew when silence was a wall and when it was only a man trying to breathe before walking into his parents' house. The porch light was on. The wreath on the door looked expensive in that quiet Midwestern way, all pine cones and ribbon, tasteful enough to say money without admitting it. Everything about the house said family, tradition, reputation. My shoulders tightened before Maribel even opened the door. My mother hugged Aveline first, both hands on her arms, bright smile, warm voice. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." Then she hugged me quickly, cheek barely touching mine. "Callum, come in before the heat gets out." From the living room, my father called, "About time." He did not come to the door. The house smelled like roast chicken, coffee, furniture polish, and old habits. I had not been inside for more than 5 minutes before Aveline saw the wall. Vance was everywhere. Vance in his high school football uniform. Vance shaking hands with the mayor. Vance standing beside Orson at a ribbon cutting for one of Voss Ridge's new developments. Vance in a suit at a charity luncheon with Maribel looking proud enough to float. My college graduation photo sat near the edge of the mantel, older frame, dusty glass, half hidden behind soap flowers. It was crooked by maybe an inch. There was no photo from my wedding. Aveline noticed without making a scene. She stepped over, touched the frame with 2 fingers, and straightened it. My mother saw. "Oh, I keep meaning to reorganize those," she said. Then she walked away and left the flowers exactly where they were. After a while, being forgotten in your own family teaches you to stop looking for yourself. Vance came in from the kitchen with a drink in his hand and the easy walk of a man who had never wondered if a room wanted him there. "There he is," he said, clapping my shoulder too hard. "The careful one." Then he turned to Aveline. His smile changed. It got brighter, sharper. "So you're the woman who finally got him out of his shell." Aveline smiled politely. "I don't think Callum was hiding." Vance gave a short laugh, like she had said something cute. At dinner, my father was talking to an old neighbor who had stopped by to drop off something for my mother's church committee. Orson gestured toward the wall of photos. That one carried the family name, he said, nodding at Vance. Then he looked at me. The youngest carried a grudge. The room laughed, not loudly. That would have been easier. It was the soft kind of laugh people give when they have accepted one person as the family joke. I laughed too. It came out on instinct. Aveline did not laugh. That was the first crack in the room. Dinner moved along like nothing had happened. Vance talked about a commercial listing. Orson talked about buyers, zoning, church contacts. Maribel said Vance was finally ready for more responsibility, as if he had not been handed responsibility wrapped in ribbon since he was 16. My work came up for maybe 20 seconds. Callum does something with computers, my mother told Aveline. I never understand it. Cyber security compliance, I said. Vance grinned. He reads the fine print on the toaster warranty. Another soft laugh. Aveline's hand found my wrist under the table. Just a touch. Not pity, not rescue. Recognition. She saw how fast I recovered. She saw the way I turned insults into background noise so dinner could keep going. Later in the car, I tried to make it smaller than it was. Sorry about the jokes, I said. They've always been like that. Aveline looked out at the glowing windows of the Voss house, then back at me. That wasn't a joke, she said. That was cruel. I had no answer, because she was right, and because some part of me knew that if Aveline could see my family clearly, sooner or later my family would see her as a threat. I thought the worst thing Vance could do was make my wife uncomfortable at dinner. I had no idea he was about to test how much disrespect my family would call charm. 2 weeks passed before my mother invited us back. She did it the way Maribel Voss always did things, with sweetness wrapped around pressure. She called while I was making coffee after work and said the last dinner had felt rushed, that everyone had been a little off, and that Aveline deserved a proper welcome. I almost said no right there. Aveline heard enough from the living room to know who it was. When I hung up, she came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter. You don't have to do this for me, I said. She folded her arms, thinking it through like she did with hard things. I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it so you don't spend the next 10 years wondering if one more honest try would have changed anything. That was Aveline, kind but not blind. So that Sunday, we ended up back in my parents' driveway, parked behind Vance's SUV again. The porch lights were on. The house looked warm enough to forgive almost anything. Aveline smoothed the front of her coat. I can handle dinner, she said. You don't have to prove yourself. I know, she said, but I don't want to become the reason you lose your family. Part of me loved her for saying that. Another part of me hated that my family had already made her feel responsible for damage they had caused long before she arrived. We reached the front door, and it opened before I finished the second knock. My mother stood there smiling, but Vance stepped around her like he had been waiting. Aveline, he said warm and loud, as if they were old friends. She offered her hand. He ignored it and pulled her into a hug. It happened fast enough to look natural, but not fast enough for me to miss the choice. His arms closed around her shoulders. Her hands stayed half raised for a second before she gave him the polite pat people use when they are ending something they never agreed to start. He did not let go. I saw her shoulders tighten. I moved closer, not pushing, not making a scene, just close enough that Vance had to know I was there. He finally released her and laughed. Well, Maribel said, delighted, someone made an impression. From the living room, Orson chuckled. Vance has always been friendly. Friendly. That was the word they used when boundaries became inconvenient. At dinner, Vance took over the room the way he always did. He told stories about our childhood, each one polished until I looked smaller by the end of it. Callum was always the careful one, he said. Kid acted like every scraped knee needed a federal investigation. My father smiled into his glass. My mother said, Vance remembers things colorfully. Aveline listened with her hands folded near her plate. She asked normal questions. She smiled when the moment called for it, but she did not laugh when the story was only cruel. That bothered Vance. I watched it happen. His jokes shifted. They stopped being about memory and started becoming tests. Honestly, he said, turning to Aveline, you must have the patience of a saint. No ordinary woman could live with a man who treats life like a seatbelt inspection. A few people laughed. Aveline gave a small smile and looked down at her food. Then Vance reached across his plate with his own fork. A piece of roast chicken sat on the end of it. Come on, he said, try this. Don't be stuck up. The table changed. Not loudly. The sound just thinned out. Forks slowed. My mother's smile held too long. Aveline looked at the fork, then at him. No thank you, she said. I don't eat from someone else's fork. There was nothing rude in her voice. That was what made it impossible to twist, unless someone was determined. Vance lowered the fork, slow as a curtain coming down. Too good for family food already, he said. Maribel laughed too quickly. He's teasing, honey. Orson shook his head. Don't make a federal case out of dinner. The old trap closed around me. If I spoke, I was jealous. If I stayed quiet, my wife stood alone in a room full of people, pretending not to understand the word no. So I kept my voice even. She said no. It was not a shout. It barely rose above the table, but it changed the air. Vance looked at me and his smile widened. Careful, little brother. Your wife can speak for herself. She did, I said. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then Maribel started talking about dessert like she could smooth the room flat with pie and coffee. Vance got quieter after that, which made him worse. Loud men are easy to point at. Smooth men make everyone doubt what they just saw. He asked Aveline about hospice work. At first, he sounded almost respectful. That must be hard, he said, being around fragile people all day. Then his eyes flicked to me. I guess you're used to fragile men. Aveline set her fork down. My patients are not fragile, she said. They are people at the end of life, and they deserve dignity. The room went still again. I was proud of her. I was also afraid for her. Vance did not like being corrected, especially by a woman he had decided should be impressed by him. After dinner, Maribel cleared plates, while Orson pulled me into a conversation about mortgage rates and local development. I answered enough to be polite, but I kept track of Aveline from the corner of my eye. She was standing near the entry table, one hand rubbing the top of her shoulder where Vance's hand had rested during that hug. When she realized I saw, she let her hand fall. On the drive home, I waited until we were past the last row of houses. Are you okay? I asked. Aveline watched the dark road ahead. I'm okay, she said, but I don't want to be alone with him. That sentence settled between us, plain and heavy. You won't be, I told her. I meant it, but promises made after dinner are easy. The next time we went back to that house, Vance waited until I was in the garage. We were almost at the car when Aveline realized her scarf was still inside. I'll get it, I said. She stayed near the passenger door with her coat pulled tight against the winter air. I went back up the walk, opened the front door quietly, and stepped into the entryway. The house had changed once dinner was over. No laughter from the table, no polite family noise, just dishes clinking in the kitchen and my father's low voice somewhere near the dining room. Aveline's scarf was folded over the entry bench. I had it in my hand when I heard Vance near the garage hallway, talking to Keaton Rusk. Keaton was one of his old friends, the kind of man who laughed before he knew the joke. Vance said, low but clear enough, "She's an arrogant woman. Women like that need a lesson." Keaton gave a short laugh. I stood there with my wife's scarf twisted in my hand. That sentence was different from the fork, different from the hug, different from the little jokes everyone wanted to call harmless. That was not charm. That was not awkwardness. That was intent dressed up as a complaint. My first instinct was to step around the corner and make him repeat it to my face. But I knew how my family worked. If I reacted there, in that hallway, the story would become Callum losing his temper again. Vance would become misunderstood. My mother would cry. My father would say, "See, this is what I'm talking about." So I walked back outside. Aveline saw my face before I said a word. "What happened?" "Get in the car," I said. "We're leaving." I did not explain in the driveway, not with that house behind us and my brother still inside it. I waited until we were 2 streets away, past the rows of quiet houses and frozen lawns. Then I told her exactly what he said. Aveline looked out the windshield for a long moment. "He didn't sound like he was joking, did he?" "No," I said. Nothing else needed to be said right then. The silence did more than words could. For the next week, Maribel called 3 times. She said dinner had been tense because everyone was still adjusting. She said I had always been quick to assume the worst of Vance. Orson sent one text. "Grown men should be able to sit at the same table without drama." I did not tell them what I heard. I already knew the answer. I misunderstood. Vance. I was jealous. Aveline was sensitive. Same script, different evening. Then Aveline surprised me. "I'll go once more," she said, while we were folding laundry at our apartment. "But if anything feels wrong, we leave." "No," I said. "You don't owe them another chance." "I know, but I don't want them saying I never tried." That was not weakness. That was Aveline trying to keep me from wondering later whether there had been one last decent door in that house. There was not. The next dinner was smaller. My mother called it simple. No pressure, just family. Vance acted almost normal when we arrived. No hug, no fork, no big jokes. He talked to Orson about a development project and asked me one bland question about work. That restraint did not comfort me. It made me watch him more closely. Maribel kept asking Aveline if she was comfortable, but not in a caring way, more like she wanted witnesses to remember she had asked. Halfway through the evening, Orson nodded toward the garage. "Callum, come help me look through a few old tax boxes. Some of that might be yours." I glanced at Aveline. She gave me a small nod. 2 minutes, I thought. In the garage, my father opened one cardboard box, then stopped pretending. He talked about my attitude, about how marriage should make a man steadier, not more suspicious, about how Vance was hurt by the accusations. That was when I understood. He had not brought me out there for boxes. Then I heard Aveline's voice from inside the house. Calm, firm. "I said move." I was through the garage door before my father finished my name. Vance stood in the kitchen doorway, angled between Aveline and the hall. One hand rested on the counter near her hip. He was not touching her, and that was the trick. Close enough to trap, far enough to deny. Aveline's face was controlled, but her eyes were not. Vance looked over his shoulder and smiled. "Your wife's got a mouth on her." I moved beside Aveline, not in front of her. She was not helpless, but she was not standing alone either. "She asked you to move," I said. "You move." Vance raised both hands like I was the unreasonable one. Maribel appeared too quickly. She had been close enough to hear, just not close enough to help. "He was teasing," she said. "You two came in ready to be offended." Orson came in behind me. "Why do you always have to turn every room into a fight?" I looked at Aveline. "Ready?" "Yes," she said. In the car, she rubbed her wrist even though he had not grabbed it. Fear does that. It finds a place to live even when no mark is there. "I'm sorry," I said. "You didn't make him do that." She was right. But guilt is not always honest. Sometimes it tries to rewrite the past so the person you love was never in danger. "We're not going back there without a reason," I told her, "and you are never being alone with him again." This time it was not comfort, it was a boundary. I thought keeping Aveline out of that house would be enough. until Vance found a way to follow her into the one place I thought my family could not reach. For a short stretch, staying away from my parents' house almost worked. I stopped picking up most of Maribel's calls. When she left messages about misunderstandings and family tension, I let them sit there. Aveline went back to her hospice shifts. I worked from our apartment on compliance audits and security reviews, the kind of work that rewards patience and punishes sloppy records. We cooked simple dinners. We folded laundry. We watched old game shows before bed because Aveline said she liked hearing people get excited over small prizes. We did not say Vance's name unless we had to. That silence felt like protection. Then Aveline's phone rang after an evening shift. She was still in her scrubs, sitting at our small kitchen table with one shoe off, when the unknown number lit up her screen. Hospice nurses do not always get to ignore unfamiliar calls. Sometimes it is a patient's daughter. Sometimes it is a frightened husband who needs to hear one steady voice before the night gets worse. Aveline answered. "Hello, this is Aveline." No one spoke. There was only breathing, slow, close to the phone. Then the call ended. The first time we tried to explain it away. Wrong number, bad connection, someone in crisis who lost their nerve. The second time came the next afternoon. The third came while she was driving home. After that, voicemails started showing up. No words, just a faint laugh, a television in the background, a breath held too long before the click. Then came the texts. "Still too good for everybody?" Arrogant women always learn. Vance knows how to handle women like you. My first reaction was anger so sharp I had to stand up and walk into the hallway. But anger was not a plan. I knew that from work. A problem you cannot prove becomes an argument. A problem you document becomes a record. "Don't delete anything," I told her. She looked at the phone like it had become dirty. "I don't want to keep it." "I know," I said, "but if we don't save it, they'll say it never happened." So I made a folder. Screenshots, call logs, voicemail exports, dates, times, exact wording. I backed everything up to an encrypted drive and wrote the same details in a notebook. Not because I wanted revenge, because I knew my family's favorite trick was making the truth blurry. A few days later, Vance's world reached the one place I thought was still hers. Aveline's hospice center was not fancy. It had soft hallway lights, a coffee machine that always sounded tired, and whiteboards filled with room notes written by nurses who had learned how to be gentle and efficient at the same time. It was a place where families whispered because grief had already taken up enough space. Aveline belonged there. She knew how to sit beside a dying man without lying to him. She knew how to help a wife choose words for a final phone call. Her badge was not just plastic in a clip. It was her name, her training, her purpose. Then Keaton Rusk walked into the lobby. He did not shout. He did not make a threat anyone could quote later. That was the point. He looked at her badge before he looked at her face. "Aveline, right?" he said. "Cute badge." He smiled like they had been introduced at a cookout. Aveline asked if he was there to see a patient. He gave a room number that turned out to be wrong, then said he must have mixed up the floor. By the time front desk staff asked if he needed help, he was already leaving. She finished her shift, but her hands shook while she signed medication notes. 3 nights later, Dax Morrow was in the parking lot. He leaned near a tow truck at the edge of the staff spaces, barely smoking a cigarette. Aveline walked out with another nurse, and Dax said, "Blue scrubs today. She likes attention." That was the detail that changed everything. He knew her shift. He knew what she was wearing. He knew where staff parked. Aveline got in her car, locked the doors, and called me before starting the engine. I stayed on the phone the whole way home, listening to her turn signal, her breathing, the quiet pauses at red lights. "Still there?" she asked twice. "I'm here," I said both times. The next morning she reported everything to Tamsin Greer, her operations supervisor. Tamsin was not cruel. She looked worried. She asked for copies of the messages. She promised to talk to security and HR. Then she said the sentence that made Aveline's face change. "I believe you, but HR is asking why these men keep showing up on our floor." Aveline said, "Why am I the problem when they're the ones showing up?" Tamsin had no clean answer. She talked about liability, visitor policy, donor relationships, and keeping staff from escalating personal matters at work. That was when I learned something I wish I had not needed to learn. A system can believe you and still protect itself first. That night, Aveline sat in her car outside our apartment for almost a minute before coming in. I saw her from the window and went downstairs. She unclipped her badge and held it in her palm. "I used to feel proud putting this on," she said. I sat beside her in the passenger seat. I did not tell her it would be fine. It was not fine. "Then we make sure they don't get to keep it," I said. I meant the badge. I meant her name. I meant the part of her that still deserved to walk into work without checking the parking lot first. By midnight, our kitchen table was covered in paper. I printed everything. I labeled each page. I added Keaton's lobby visit, Dax's truck, Tamsin's HR meeting, the unknown calls, the texts, the voicemails. Aveline watched me place her old badge beside the folder. "Keeping all this makes it feel more real," she said. "It is real," I told her. "That's why we're not letting them make it disappear." And even then, after everything, I still made one mistake. I decided to give my parents one chance to see the evidence and choose safety over Vance. I walked into their house with screenshots, voicemails, dates, and names, still foolish enough to believe proof could matter to people who had already chosen their son. The next morning, I printed everything again. Not because I needed more paper on the table, but because I knew my parents. If I walked in with only my phone, Orson would call it emotional. If I spoke from memory, Maribel would say I sounded worked up. So I made it plain. Dates, times, screenshots, call logs, the messages with the word lesson. A photo of Dax's tow truck near the staff lot. A note about Keaton saying Aveline's name after looking at her hospice badge. Aveline's own written account in her neat nurse's handwriting, describing how each incident affected her work and her drive home. Her old badge sat beside the folder while I sorted the pages. "I want them to see it in order," I said. Aveline watched me slide the documents into clear sleeves. "What if they do see it," she asked, "and still don't care?" I did not answer right away, because that was the question sitting under everything. We went to my parents' house that afternoon. The living room looked exactly the same. Same polished tables, same soft lamps, same wall full of Vance. My graduation photo was still half hidden behind the silk flowers, like even being straightened had been too much attention. I put the folder on the coffee table. "I'm going to say this calmly once," I said. "Aveline is being followed. She's getting calls from unknown numbers. Keaton and Dax have shown up at her workplace. The messages use the same word Vance used about her." Maribel looked at the folder, then reached for the tissue box before a single page had been opened. Orson leaned back in his chair. "That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation." Before he could answer, Vance walked in from the hallway. That was when I understood they had invited him. He had a small bruise across the knuckles of his right hand. Nothing dramatic, just enough for my mother to notice. "What happened?" Maribel asked, standing at once. "Nothing," Vance said, giving me a tired look. "Hit it on some shelving at work. I didn't even want to come over. Mom said I should hear what Callum thinks I did this time." Maribel hurried to the kitchen and came back with an ice pack wrapped in a dish towel. The folder stayed closed. Aveline sat beside me, hands folded in her lap, while my mother held ice to Vance's hand like he was the injured one in the room. I said, "I brought you proof that my wife is being followed, and you're asking me to look at his hand." Orson's mouth tightened. "What I see is a man becoming obsessed with his brother." Maribel looked at me with wet eyes. You have always been jealous of Vance. Now you've pulled your wife into it. Aveline tried to speak. Maribel, I'm the one getting the calls. My mother turned to her with pity so polished it looked almost kind. Honey, hospice work is heavy. Fear can make ordinary things look connected. That was the moment something in me settled. I opened the folder myself and laid the pages across the table. Here are the call logs. Here are the messages. Here is the date Keaton came to the hospice center. Here is Dax's truck. Vance barely glanced at them. Orson said, "Does any of this prove Vance sent them?" "No, it proves a pattern." "A pattern in your mind," he said. I kept my voice low. I would not give them the scene they wanted. "If this continues, we're going to the police and an attorney." Orson stood slowly. "Then don't be surprised when this town starts asking why you hate your own family so much." There it was. Not advice. A warning wearing a father's face. I closed the folder. "Come on, Aveline." We went straight from that house to the police station. The officer at the front desk was not rude. That almost made it worse. He listened, took notes, looked through a few screenshots, and asked normal questions at first. Then the names came up. Voss, Keaton Rusk, Dax Morrow. His pen slowed. He asked if Keaton might have been visiting someone at the hospice center. He asked if Dax could have been parked there for a tow call. He asked if any message came directly from Vance's phone. Then he asked Aveline carefully, "Is it possible your brother-in-law misunderstood your friendliness?" Aveline's face went still. "She is his sister-in-law," I said. "I have to ask," the officer replied. The report was filed, but the words on it felt softer than the truth. Alleged unwanted contact. No direct evidence of orchestration. Advise parties to avoid contact. In the parking lot, Aveline held the folded copy in both hands. How many times does something have to happen before it stops being alleged? I had no answer that would not insult both of us. 2 days later, I met Soren Pike in a small office above a dental clinic. No marble lobby, no polished family name on the door. Just a practical man with tired eyes who read every page before speaking. "This report is weak," he said. My stomach dropped. "But it's dated," he continued. "That matters. The messages matter. The repeated word lesson matters. Her workplace notes matter. Witness names matter." He tapped the folder once. "Do not confront Vance alone. Do not answer threats emotionally. Do not post about this. Evidence does not have to roar. Sometimes it just has to be dated, saved, and consistent." That sentence gave me something solid to hold. That night, Aveline tried to sleep while I sat at the kitchen table with the folder open. Her badge still was not on her work bag. Part of me wanted to quit, move, block everyone, let the Voss family tell Eau Claire whatever story made them comfortable. But the police report was on the table. The word alleged hurt. Still, the date was real. The folder was real. Her fear had a record now. So I scanned the report, saved it twice, and placed it behind the screenshots. I thought the police report would scare my parents into caution. Instead, my mother invited us to dinner and called it healing. Maribel left 3 voicemails before I answered. The first one was soft. The second was tearful. By the third, she sounded like a mother who knew exactly where to press. "Callum, I'm not asking you to apologize," she said. "I'm asking you to come home and let us heal. Your brother is hurt. Your father barely sleeps. Families don't survive by filing reports on each other." Aveline stood beside me while the message played. She did not tell me what to do. When it ended, she asked, "Do you think they actually want to hear us?" I wanted to say no. I should have said no, but some tired part of me still hoped a police report had made them serious. A week later, we pulled up to the house just before dinner. The first warning was the driveway. Too many cars. Vance's SUV, my aunt's Buick, Keaton Rusk's truck, Dax Morrow's old vehicle near the curb. Aveline went quiet. "We can leave," I said. She looked at the house, then at me. If we leave now, they'll say we refuse to talk. She was right, and that was the trap. My family could turn any choice into proof against us. I took her hand. Then we go in together, and we leave together. The living room had been rearranged. The chairs formed a loose half circle. The low love seat was waiting for us, like a witness stand with cushions. A tissue box sat on the coffee table, perfectly centered. Deacon Hollis Wren from my mother's church sat near Orson with a small notebook in his lap. Vance was beside Maribel, not across from her. That told me all I needed to know. He was not there to answer. He was there to be protected. Keaton sat near the doorway. Dax leaned against the back wall. No one offers healing with the men who scared your wife standing by the exit. Maribel began before I could take off my coat. "We're not here to attack anyone," she said. "We just want Aveline to understand the damage accusations can do." Aveline's hand tightened around mine. My aunt sighed. "Vance has always been affectionate. Some people just don't understand how this family jokes." Orson looked at me. "Your resentment is poisoning your marriage." Maribel turned to Aveline with that gentle voice she used at church luncheons. "Honey, hospice work is emotionally heavy. Sometimes fear follows people home." Deacon Hollis cleared his throat. "False accusations can ruin lives." Not one person asked why Keaton and Dax had shown up at her workplace. Aveline opened her incident log. "On March 12th, Keaton came to the hospice lobby and called me by name." Vance cut in. "See? She writes everything down like she was waiting to build a case." "She wrote it down because it happened," I said. Orson pointed at me. "Lower your voice." My voice had not risen. That was the old room working on me again. The hurt person had to stay calm enough to be believed, while everyone else got to call cruelty concern. Then Keaton made his mistake. He leaned back and smiled like this was all beneath him. "I've seen her around town. Eau Claire isn't Chicago. She's memorable, that's all. Green scrubs Monday, navy jacket Tuesday. That little silver cross necklace she keeps touching when she wants people feeling sorry for her." The room changed. Aveline stopped moving. I looked at Keaton. Not at my mother, not at Vance. Keaton. "How would you know what she wore to work?" The silence that followed was the most honest thing that room had given us. Vance's eyes snapped toward Keaton. Dax looked down at the carpet. Deacon Hollis lowered his gaze to his notebook. For once, the truth sat there without needing Aveline to carry it. My mother could have stopped it. She could have looked at Keaton and asked the question every decent adult in that room should have asked. Instead, she said, "That is not the point." I stared at her. "The point," she continued, "is why she keeps attracting this kind of attention." Aveline closed her notebook. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I'm done." Orson stood. "Don't walk out like a coward, Callum." Vance gave a small laugh. "He always did need a woman to make him feel brave." I felt anger, but it did not scatter me this time. It made everything clear. At the door, Maribel grabbed my wrist. Not hard, but with the old authority of a mother who still believed my guilt belonged to her. "You can keep defending her," she said, "or you can come back to your real family." I looked at her hand, then at Aveline, then at the room that had spent my whole life calling harm a misunderstanding. "If protecting my wife cost me this family," I said, "then I was never safe here either." Maribel began crying before I finished turning away. Orson said my name like a warning. Vance laughed once, quieter than before. I did not look back. In the car, Aveline pressed both hands to her chest and tried to slow her breathing. "I'm sorry," I said. She shook her head. "You got me out." That mattered. I had not fixed my parents. I had not convinced Deacon Hollis. I had not turned that room honest. But I got my wife out. As I drove away from the Voss house, I understood something I should have learned much earlier. Leaving is not always defeat. Sometimes it is the first honest protection you ever give yourself. I thought walking out of that room would make me feel free, but freedom can feel a lot like grief when the people you leave behind are your own parents. The apartment was quiet after the living room trial, but it was not peaceful. Aveline showered, then sat on the edge of our bed with wet hair and an old sweatshirt pulled over her scrubs. She looked worn down in a way sleep could not fix. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the evidence folder, the police report, and her hospice badge near the mail tray. I had chosen my wife out loud. I expected that to feel clean. It did not. I kept hearing my mother cry behind me. I kept hearing my father say my name like a warning. I kept seeing that crooked graduation photo, still half buried behind flowers in the house I had just walked out of. Sometimes doing the right thing feels less like victory and more like bearing the last version of yourself that still hoped. By midnight, I almost decided to stop, move quietly, block everyone, let the Voss family tell whatever story they wanted, as long as Aveline never had to sit in that room again. But that thought brought shame, not peace. If I spoke, I was the son who broke the family. If I stayed silent, I became one more man letting Vance keep doing what he wanted. Aveline saw it on my face. "I don't need you to fix them," she said. "I need us to be honest about what they are." 2 days later, my cousin Kedra Vale called. I had not heard her voice in months. She asked if we could meet at a coffee shop downtown, away from my parents, away from church people, away from anyone who would accidentally report back to Maribel. Kedra sounded nervous. Not dramatic, nervous like someone who had spent years deciding whether truth was worth the punishment. We met the next afternoon. Aveline sat beside me, both hands around a paper cup of tea. Kedra looked at her first. "I'm sorry," she said, "not for what you feel, for what they're doing." Then she looked at me. "I saw who Vance was before any of you were old enough to name it. They called me a liar too." She told us about being 12 and finding her cat locked in the shed behind my grandparents' place. She said Vance laughed when she cried. When she told the adults, they said she wanted attention. They said boys do foolish things. They said she had always been sensitive. The worst part, Kedra said, was not what he did. It was watching every adult decide my truth was less convenient than his future. Aveline's eyes filled, but she did not interrupt. Kedra reached across the table. "I'm sorry they are doing to you what they did to me." That sentence changed something. Aveline was not an outsider causing trouble. She was the newest person placed inside an old pattern. Kedra told us about her wedding to Bram. She wanted us there, but only if Aveline could be safe. Bram knew enough. His brother Garrick, a police officer from another county, would be there as family. The seating chart kept Vance across the room. The planner knew not to let Vance corner anyone. The videographer would be filming the reception and hallway entrances anyway. "I want you there," Kedra said, "but I want her safe more." After that meeting, I stopped thinking of the Voss house as a place where truth could win. The walls were arranged against us, just like the photographs. Vance believed I would explode or disappear. Orson believed his name and letterhead could scare people quiet. Maribel believed guilt would bring me back. I decided to do none of those things. I called Soren Pike and told him about Kedra, the living room, Keaton's clothing detail, and the wedding. He listened without interrupting. "Write it down while it is fresh," he said. "Dates, names, exact words." So I did. 3 days later, an envelope arrived from a law firm tied to Orson's business circle. The letter was polite. That made it worse. It referred to emotionally charged accusations, family misunderstandings, and unnecessary reputational harm. It offered to help cover counseling costs if Aveline would clarify that Vance never intended harm. It warned that further statements could be considered defamatory. Aveline read it once and set it on the table. "They don't want me safe," she said. "They want me quiet." I wanted to call Orson. I wanted to send the letter to every relative who had sat in that living room. Instead, I scanned it. I photographed the envelope. I saved the postmark. Then I sent everything to Soren. At his office, Soren read the letter twice. They did not just deny what happened, he said. They tried to purchase silence. That matters. Can it help us? Maybe not today, he said, but lies leave fingerprints too. That line stayed with me. For the first time, restraint did not feel like weakness. It felt like aim. We decided to attend Kedra's wedding with rules. We would not be alone with Vance. We would leave if anything felt wrong. Bram and Garrick knew enough to watch. The truth was no longer allowed only in rooms my parents controlled. I put the lawyer letter behind the police report and Keaton's admission in the folder. It had been written to make Aveline disappear. One day I thought it might help prove exactly who tried to silence her. Kedra's wedding was supposed to be the first family room where Aveline could breathe, but Vance had never respected a closed door, a wedding vow, or a woman walking away alone. For most of Kedra's wedding, I almost believed we had prepared enough. The venue sat outside Eau Claire, all string lights, white linens, and soft music drifting over a summer lawn. Kedra had kept her word. Our table was far from Vance. Bram checked on us without making it obvious. Garrick Vale, Bram's brother, was there as family, not as a uniform, but his calm presence helped. Aveline looked beautiful in a pale blue dress, tense but beautiful. During dinner, Kedra said something about Bram's dancing, and Aveline laughed. A real laugh. I noticed because I had not heard that sound around my family in months. Vance behaved at first. That should have reassured me. It did not. He smiled, shook hands, let Maribel adjust his tie, and stayed across the room. Orson gave me one cold look near the bar, but said nothing. My mother dabbed at her eyes during the first dance like she was the wounded one in the family. Aveline leaned close after dessert. "I'm going to the restroom." I nodded, watching her cross toward the hallway. A few seconds later, I glanced toward Vance's table. His chair was empty. The music dulled as I moved through the reception crowd. I had just reached the hall entrance when I heard Aveline scream. Bram moved before I called his name. Garrick followed right behind him. We found Vance near the restroom corridor, crowding Aveline against the wall. One hand was near her mouth. The other gripped her upper arm hard enough that I could see the pressure in his fingers. One strap of her dress had torn loose. She was twisting away from him, trying to get space. Bram pulled Vance back. Garrick stepped in with a voice that cut through the noise. "Hands where I can see them. Now!" Vance started shouting before anyone asked a question. "She followed me back here." Aveline was trying to breathe. I went to her first. "Can you breathe?" I asked. She nodded, but barely. Then Vance yelled louder. "She's been begging for a lesson since the first night." That word again. Lesson. It landed in the hallway like a door slamming shut. I wanted to hit him. I will not pretend I did not. My hands shook with it. Vance saw that and smiled through his panic. "Come on, little brother. Show them what you really are. You've wanted to hit me since we were kids." That was his last familiar trick. If I touched him, the whole story changed. Two brothers fighting at a wedding. Vance with an injury. Maribel crying about both her sons. Orson telling everyone I was unstable. So I stood between Aveline and the crowd, not between her and the truth. "You want me to make this about us," I said. "I won't." Orson pushed through the guests, already managing the room like a closing deal. "This is a family matter." Maribel went to Vance first, not Aveline. "Vance." "He's drunk," she said. "He's embarrassed." She must have asked him to talk. Orson pulled out his phone and showed Garrick a screenshot from an old group message where Aveline had written, "We just want tonight to be peaceful." He used it like proof she had wanted a private conversation. I almost argued. Then I remembered Soren. "Please include that screenshot in the report," I told Garrick, "exactly as he is presenting it." Garrick looked at me once and nodded. Kedra came back with the videographer's preview on her phone. The clip showed Aveline leaving the reception alone. It showed Vance watching her, setting down his drink, and following seconds later. She never turned, never waved him over, never invited him. Maribel said, "She must have said something before that." Kedra looked at her. "Then why did he wait until she walked away alone?" Her voice dropped. "You called me a liar when I was 12. You don't get to do it to her." For a moment, I thought of that crooked photo Aveline had straightened months before. My family had arranged pictures for years, so Vance looked like the story, and I looked like the problem. But video does not care who a mother loves more. The police came. Statements were taken. Aveline's arm was photographed. Garrick told us to get medical documentation that night, so we did. I kept her torn dress in a paper bag because Soren had told me fabric can matter. Several weeks later, we sat in court for the protective order hearing. Aveline was not healed. Her hands stayed folded so tightly her knuckles paled. But she was there. Vance's attorney called it a drunken misunderstanding. He mentioned my resentment. He mentioned family conflict. He even tried Orson's screenshot. Soren did not argue personality. He argued pattern. The first lesson statement, the text, Keaton describing Aveline's clothes. The police report, weak as it was. The lawyer letter, the wedding video, Vance's own hallway outburst. Judge Verity Lark looked over the timeline. Then she asked, "Why does the word lesson appear before and after the alleged assault?" Nobody answered right away. The order was granted. Outside the courthouse, I expected triumph. It never came. Aveline leaned against me and breathed like someone who had been underwater too long. Being believed did not undo anything. It gave us enough air to leave. We moved to Madison with the protective order, a box of evidence, and Aveline's old badge packed in cardboard. I thought distance would turn the story into the past. 4 years later, my mother called and proved it had never really ended. Madison gave us room to breathe. Our house was smaller than the Voss place, but nothing in it was arranged to make one person disappear. There were shoes by the door, a stack of children's books near the couch, and one family photo on the shelf where everyone stood in the center. Aveline rebuilt her career. She became a hospice nursing coordinator, then director. One morning before work, she clipped on her new badge and smiled a little. "This one doesn't feel heavy," she said. I knew exactly what she meant. Her name belonged to her again. Our daughter was 3 when my phone lit up with a number I had not answered in years. Maribel Voss. I almost let it ring out. Then I saw the time and picked up. She was crying, but not the careful crying from family dinners. This was panic. "Vance has been arrested," she said. "Your father is in trouble too. Callum, we need you. Family has to stick together now." I looked toward the baby monitor glowing on the kitchen counter. "What happened to Blythe?" I asked. There was a pause. Blythe Cara was Vance's wife. I had heard he married a woman from church after we left Eau Claire. I had never met her. Maribel said Blythe had missed 3 shifts at the credit union. A coworker called for a welfare check. Police found her hurt, frightened, and surrounded by months of proof. My mother did not start with an apology to Aveline. She started by asking me to protect Vance. "I spent 4 years hoping I was wrong about him," I said. Maribel began the old language. "Marriage is complicated. Blythe exaggerates. Vance was under pressure. Orson was only trying to calm things down. Unstable. Misunderstanding. Family matter. Different woman. Same machine." Over the next weeks, the truth came out through Kedra, Soren, and later Ada Rourke, the prosecutor. Orson had called Blythe's manager at the credit union and suggested she was unreliable. He had pressured her parents, Lowell and Anselma, through mortgage contacts. He used Voss Ridge Realty emails to frame her as dramatic. Payments to Keaton Rusk showed up as security consulting. Even the old lawyer letter sent to scare Aveline became useful. It showed a pattern. My father thought documents protected powerful men. He forgot documents could be saved. Aveline did not want to relive any of it. She had earned peace. But when I told her Blythe might have to testify, she sat quietly for a long time. Then she said, if Blythe has to stand in a courtroom, she shouldn't have to stand there alone. Through Soren, she gave a written statement, the texts, the word lesson, the workplace stalking, the wedding video, the protective order. Not revenge, witness. Vance went to prison. Orson's real estate license was suspended. Partners cut ties. Voss Ridge lost clients. Legal bills and civil claims forced my parents to list the house. Maribel lost her church committee role, and with it the image she had guarded harder than she ever guarded the women Vance hurt. The real estate sign came down. The court did not take everything from my parents. Their choices did. A cousin sent me the listing photos. I opened them once. The living room looked smaller, empty. The wall that once worshipped Vance was bare. Pale rectangles marked where frames had hung. No football picture. No ribbon-cutting photo. No old graduation picture of mine hidden behind flowers. For years, I thought I wanted my picture to matter in that house. I did not anymore. Months later, Maribel sent a long letter. This one sounded different. She wrote, "We made him." I did not tear it up. I did not answer it either. Aveline asked, "Are you okay?" "I don't know," I said, "but our daughter is safe." That was enough for that night. I placed the letter in a box with old evidence copies and Aveline's first hospice badge. Not to honor the pain, but to remember that we survived people who tried to erase it. In the end, I did not save the Voss family name. I saved the family that still knew how to tell the truth.